Good evening and welcome to Writers Speak. Tonight we have Lauren. I've messed it up myself. Lauren Aliza Green is going to read for us tonight, but Claire Yench is going to come and introduce her. So welcome, Claire.
Am I tall enough for this? Yes. Hi, again, I'm Claire. Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Again, I'm going to introduce Lauren Aliza Green. She is a novelist, a poet, and a musician, which I think you'll see as she reads the book. She's going to be reading an excerpt from her debut novel, The World After Alice, as well as some of her poetry. Other works, her chapbook, A Great Dark House, won the Poetry Society of America's Chapbook Fellowship, and her writing has appeared or is forthcoming in Lit Hub, Virginia Quarterly Review, Threepenny Review, American Short Fiction, and elsewhere. Her other recognitions include the Avon Boland Award, sponsored by Poetry Ireland and Stanford University, and she has a spot on Forbes 2024 30 Under 30 list. So, welcome, Lauren.
Yay. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Christian. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited to read for you. I'm actually not reading from the book. I'm going to read mostly things that are unpublished, because I figure that's a little more fun. But, and you'll see I was in my hotel room just like editing them as I was looking at them. So very, very unpublished, but a bit of short fiction, a bit of poetry. Okay, this is called What's What? And it's short fiction. Okay. She was dying. That was the first thing. The first thing was that she was dying. She was 34, and it was the sunset of her life, though both of them still had the teenager's belief that death would pass them by. In the hospital, she said to her husband that she just wanted him to be happy. A lie. But she'd be dead by the time he figured out what happiness was, so it was a lie detached from consequence. After I die, she'd think. It became her constant refrain, her internal mantra. There were tubes, needles, many unpleasant smells. She was always going on about the rovers atop Mars. That was the second thing, the rovers, 5 of them equipped with solar panels. She loved talking about metal and other inorganic matter. The husband wanted to feel alive. He told his mistress this. Sex made him feel alive, or at least obliterated the part of him that was aware that it could die, or was dying at present. And weren't these the same? The mistress rubbed his back, a motion that came naturally to her, she being a mother of 2. She always wore wine-colored lipstick in a shade called Eau Van Gogh, which she'd reapply in the rear view before heading back to the office. The husband had met her at a work conference in Miami before his wife fell ill. He didn't love her and never made the mistake of telling her that he did. That was the third thing. The third thing was that the husband knew what was what. He knew that there were 5 rovers on Mars, and most of them were dead, and their names were Sojourner, Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, and Perseverance. This is part of the same piece. This is called The Friend. Recently, an ex-friend of mine had a story published in a small but nationally acclaimed magazine, one whose pieces are printed in an elegant serif that prizes beauty over legibility. I discovered this when a mutual of ours rang me and asked in the low voice one might use to disclose a cancer diagnosis, "Did you hear about X's story?" The piece was one I'd read years ago, when my ex-friend and I were still in the tell each other everything phase of our friendship. In sororal spirit, we'd taken a workshop together and would spend the hour defending each other against our peers' critiques. Afterward, we'd walk home with our arms linked, she smoking and fuming, while I listened, the trees around us large and filled with papery autumn leaves. Nothing in particular led to our fallout, nothing I'm aware of at least. This has happened to me enough times throughout my life that I've come to diagnose it as something of a pattern. Women with whom I've been intensely, blindingly intimate will disappear without explanation, and in the void of their absence, I flagellate myself trying to recall every instance that might have led to their departure. In the letter at the front of the magazine, the editor described my ex-friend's piece, a retelling of the cherry orchard from the maid Dunyasha's perspective, as a, quote, first-rate account of unchecked vanity. Good grief, I thought. because this was exactly what my husband had said to me the first time he met my ex-friend. She likes to talk about herself a lot, doesn't she? Naturally, I'd grown defensive. I said he didn't understand that my friend was an extrovert while I was an introvert. Thus, we were each other's perfect complements, she the left shoe and I the right. And now, to see it all laid out there in fancy print like that, a first-rate account of unchecked vanity. How was it others could spot in a single story what I myself had missed for years? I went on reading. Through every paragraph, every sentence, I felt a vast desolation unfurl inside me, the kind I associate with a particular swath of West Texas I drove through alone after a bad breakup one winter. I remember calling my ex-friend on the drive. She kept me company for hours. At the end, I lifted a hand to my eyes in astonishment and wondered, why is it a story so unresolved has moved me to tears? The real thing. The most vivid memory I have of my Uncle Mark is of his legs, the dark markings on them, 50 lesions like a trail of ant bites up his calves. They wouldn't let us kids into his hospital room. We sat on a bench in the hallway, playing chopsticks and I Spy. The wing had the sort of sterile smell intended to cover up other smells. If you touch him, my brother said, you'll get the virus too. It's worse than cooties. You can get it just by looking at him. This was still early days. Mark was in a trial for AZT and didn't know if they were giving him sugar pills or the real thing. My mother shrieked at the nurses who stood outside Mark's door, playing rock, paper, scissors to determine which unlucky nurse among them would have to enter to change Mark's IV. Mom said, let me get it. I don't care. Who the flying fuck cares? She was saying a lot of things she didn't mean then. She told my father she never wanted to see him again, when what she really meant was that she wanted him not to do lines at the pub after work. I watched Mark through the door panel. He was gaunt and delirious, but smiled when he saw me. The sunlight through the window blended with the side of his face. He appeared to be dissolving into it. Sugar pills, I thought. He waved at me, and something inside me waved back. Okay, that was some short fiction. Now I'm going to do a bit of poetry. Okay. Dear Wonder, I have holed away in this house for months, not to escape the world, but to feel more inside it. And yet when I emerge, I doubt I will be closer to the trees, their ancient knowledge, nor able to tease from autumn's compositions the nighthawk's sharp cry. Could I have tried harder? Even memory flees when it comes too near absence, our pasts running out ahead of us like children gone to seize fireflies at dusk. Along Cherokee Avenue, there stands a church where once stretched a river, a stoled deacon kneeling before its door. Always the air smells of jasmine. Always the street lights on the street corners stay dark. At night, we ask each other questions with our hands and take turns prophesizing on bygones. One day the world will be stripped clean to its pith, and still we will take it to our tongues, stealing for any last drop. Okay, on returning. In the suburbs, all the car models are aspirational. Civic, Accord, Brio. Between each house lies a distance incalculable to the human eye. Once I knew a man who measured the moon with his thumb, like a hunter gauging his proximity to a deer, or a student of portraiture trying to grasp perspective. How old are we the first time someone teaches us to use our body as a reference point? The way people in mountain towns, when lost, use the mountains to navigate home. The party. I'm always imagining you, husband, in the private moment when you decided to leave. When was it? And did you know at our daughter's birthday party in the park, when she opened her hand and accidentally released the balloons from her grasp? When you kissed me so long in our silly triangular hats, our love embarrassed the guests. The clouds overhead looked like cutouts, and I suppose it is true one can make a picture out of absence. One can push herself against walls in hopes of jolting herself back. Some days I forget. I wake up expecting you. Then I feel the hope disperse from my body until only a shadow of it remains, the way heat leaves a radiator still clanking and warm. Husband, did you choose to let go? How certain were you? How deliberate, how long or quick? Could I have stopped you before or after the party, when around us the balloons ascended dreamily into the sky? From above they watched as a hand lit the candles on the cake, and all the children started to sing. Persephone. Each day I plead my bargains. I say I will be good, tidy the bed, push in the chair. Everyone I love will be okay. They will fatten gladly into old age so long as I do the promised chores, abandon all sense of direction, remain on the right side of the windbreak. My house is windowless. The street goes on forever. We have a mailbox, a kettle, a cat with orange stripes who pounces at crawling things after dark. I mean to show you how others might be happy here. Soon things will change. The foxes will claw deeper their dens. The heat will no longer sparkle over the pavestone. A solitary car driving the freeway will believe the road goes on longer than it does. Once I was desolate, and the practice of stillness saved me. In stillness, I watched the life I knew lift back against the glass roof of the snow globe and start to fall again. Okay. I'm going to do 2 more poems and then a small piece of fiction. Maybe. Yes. Okay. I was debating. And there's this one that I am still trying to work out. So maybe I'll skip that one. Okay. Distant objects. What can it do to know so much if knowledge cannot change me? For months I waited for the hand of anger to slip inside my body, waited to be boxed in, backed up, called upon to act. How badly I did and did not want this. The world kept pulse on the edge of that year when I paused to watch the headlights rouse from sleep the wild horses in the Arsenault's field. Not a pleasant wakening, not the kind that feels natural. Instead, a darkness like water that the horses thrashed and reared against. They found the body but not the girl. They found the sky but not the slit through which the discreet drops of rain lifted one April day to weave themselves back together. Last poem. Okay. Yes, last poem. All right. This is called Fidelity. At the party, in the smoky living room with the coats heaped on the couch, Brubeck on the speaker, my 2 friends, each engaged to others, meet. I observe the slipperiness of their flirtation for hours, their wordless assents each is acting in good faith. On the terrace overlooking Broadway, they hold sweaty drinks and look wonderingly into each other's eyes, saying ordinary things in covert tones to make them sound like secrets. They are good people, my friends, though none of them all that happy. They have day jobs to which they vow never to return once their real lives take off. At midnight, the snow begins. It arcs softly around us, but refuses to gather, which is the path we thought misfortune would take, too. My friends, are we faithless or simply tired? Let us rest at this party for no one, and watch the snow unmake the ground and sky. If the story is to begin again, let us choose where to start. Let us be good in our choosing. Let us know what to call night and day. And let only one of them, here you pick, be reserved for our hunger. Okay. One last piece of short fiction. This one's called The Circus Train. The summer before the occupation of Poland, My grandfather belonged to a circus that zigzagged up the country, from Krakow to Vilnius. He worked as a roustabout, pitching the canvas tent and rigging the aerial silks. His favorite thing about the gig, he said, was that the circus traveled by freight train. Sometimes he'd have to hop on while the train was already in motion. 60 years later, he still had the scars along his calves to prove it. Every weekend, the year I turned 13, I slept over at his and Grandma's. On Friday afternoons, my mother would drop me off in front of their duplex in White Plains, and I'd walk the 3 steps to the door. I didn't enjoy being there, but it beat being home. My grandparents' house contained little by way of entertainment. It's no small thing to be bored, my grandfather said, when I complained about the lack of game consoles and the TV that played only 4 channels. To him, boredom was a luxury. For hours, he'd sit in his wingback chair, a look of contentment etched across his face as he stared out the window at the tall oaks flanking the house. Each Saturday evening, after my grandmother departed for her bridge club, my grandfather would get talking about those days spent hauling equipment from the railroad station to the showgrounds. He was senile by then, had already started to forget small things, the name of his neighbor, what grade I was in, which door led to the bathroom, the bedroom. But he still remembered the final circus performance and would recount it with the same bravado each time, as if it were the first. Several men in leotards were on stage, balancing on big rainbow balls when the gunfire began. The shots were far away enough that they sounded like fireworks, dull, flat cracks. The audience laughed and glanced around, assuming it was part of the act. But then overhead, fighter bombers filled the sky. In the distance, ashy clouds plumed. People screamed. No one knew where to run. My grandfather said he'd never seen so many people moving at once, a sea of them pushing forward toward God knows what. What happened to them, I asked. Did they make it out before the Nazis arrived? At this point in the telling, his expression changed, and I understood that he was no longer with me, but back at the circus, covering his mouth with his scarf to keep out the smoke. I leaned in, committing his words to memory, wanting to get them right. The saddest part, he said, what he couldn't let go of, was hurrying backstage and finding the animals still tethered to their cages, whimpering, hackles raised. Lions and tigers, even the majestic elephant, whose eyes were large and wet between the bars, as if she knew it was something they'd both never forget. Thank you.
So we're going to open it up for questions. Jackie? Or
Thank you. Hello again.
Hi, Jackie.
So my question was relating to the world after Alice.
Yes.
One of the resounding praises attributed to your novel, and you've also gorgeously exhibited with these new unpublished works, is the accurate and interesting portrayal of human nature. I was wondering if you have any advice for writers who aim to create realistic characters as well.
Okay. Thinking about it. Well, I think that realistic characters comes from observing people, right? Watching and listening and then figuring out why somebody is acting the way that they are. That's something I'm really interested in, is understanding somebody's motivations. And we were just talking about ethics in writing, and something that I think comes up over and over again is the idea that everyone always thinks they're acting out of good intent. You know, I don't think anyone in the world, when they're doing something, thinks it's coming from a bad place. And I think that if you can bring that to your characters, and rather than judging what they're doing, understanding why they're doing it, then that's the first step in crafting people who feel real, or who feel who have arrows going in multiple directions, is how I like to say it, you know, because people are so full of contradictions. It's what makes people interesting. And so to move in a little closer, like as soon as the instinct is to make somebody a caricature or to flatten them, because then we can understand them, it's to take a few steps nearer, because that's when they become more interesting.
Hi again.
Hi.
My question also has to do with your published novel.
Yes.
What was the moment the idea for it formed for you? Like, why the story, and why did you have to write about it?
Wow. I don't know that I did. I don't know that I had to, in the sense that had I sat down an hour later, something else could have very easily come to me. And which is to say that I'm never, at least when I personally sit down, I'm not thinking of things in a grand scope. I'm not thinking, okay, here's the novel, here's chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But usually it'll just be a single gesture or an image. You know, sometimes it'll be a character that I just can like hear their voice or see them, and it's that little, oh God, sorry, that little micro, that micro thing that's the seed of something for me. And so my feeling is, we were just talking about, you know, if you sit down to write 150 words, sometimes you'll end up writing more and more and more. If I can write into that gesture, maybe it's just, you know, the way somebody stands that says something about their feeling in that moment, then usually I can try to get beyond that. And so that's how the book started, right? I just had this image and I thought, okay, what happens? Like, who is this girl that I'm seeing, and where's her family? Yeah, and that was where the idea came from. Yeah, thank you.
You work in 3 different genres that you know, your novel, and then you read short fiction and poetry. Can you talk a little bit about how you move from one to another? Do you work simultaneously, or do you know, how do you decide where it's going, what form it's going to take?
Sure. So I'm very rarely working simultaneously. It's usually if I finish a project, like right now I just finished a big, you know, a novel, and then my mind immediately goes to poetry because it's so short and it's a nice way to give myself a break. Or sometimes I'll have an idea, but it doesn't feel novel-sized, and that is when I know that's going to be a short story. Like, I want to spend time with these people, but I don't want to spend years and years with these people. That's when the short story instinct kicks in. But also I keep, you know, I have a journal, and I will sometimes just write down lines that observations, and they could very easily go into like my poetry fragments document, or I could put them into a story, or into a book. And so I actually think that the boundaries between those forms are way more malleable than one likes to think, or one does think. I don't know. Certainly for me, I think everything I write in a poem could just as easily be put into a book. I would just have to put plot and character around it.
Hello again.
Hi.
I was thinking about both with The World After Alice and with some of the pieces you just read. It kind of seems like there's a theme that I really enjoy of looking at a place and looking at it not only in the present but throughout history. Like, for example, in the book The Brownstone, we can think of it in the present and the past, and it kind of becomes a recurring place. When you are just kind of thinking, daydreaming, going through your writing practice, is history and, you know, the kind of the way perspective changes in a place over time, does that affect how you write the characters to make them more realistic, to see them as more well-rounded people, to kind of see all their different perspectives? Does that make sense?
Ooh, that does. That's a very interesting question. I am very interested in the idea of people as composites, you know, that we are not only the composite of our experience, but the experience of the people who came before us and the people who came before them. And then if you start taking that far enough, it gets to this almost existential place of, well, you know, in this moment, we're all here. Like, we all happen to be here, but also, you know, there's like 10 quadrillion insects flying around the earth and X number of planes flying around the skies, bringing people here and there. And the sun is like X amount of miles. And I think that the idea of moving out, oh my God, I'm so sorry, guys. I talk with my hands, but the idea of like moving out and out and out and then moving in and in and in is really compelling to me. I think it's narratively does something really interesting because it, you know, I'm just going to go on a small tangent, but I really love Kurt Vonnegut. And in Slaughterhouse-Five, there's that idea that this other race has of that time is not linear, right? It's the past, present, and future are all one, almost as if, if you were to look at the Rocky Mountains, you would see it all at once. And I think that the fiction I'm most interested in is the fiction that in some way gives me a sense of perspective like that, where I can see the past, I can see the present, and also I can see the future, and that it's not a line,
No, that definitely comes through. I love that.
Thank you.
As has already been said, the character development that you are able to, the way you bring the characters to life is really, you feel like you know these people. And I'm wondering how you decide that the story is finished with the characters, because at the very end of your novel, there's Peter's now met this bartender who he sort of is, it seems like there's a spark there, and I'm just wondering if there's more to come. Do you think maybe there'll be a sequel, or like how do you decide when to end? I guess it's a very long way of asking that question.
Right. Well, so there's the practical just ending, and then there's the how do I decide when something's done? And those are, do you mean both? Or the latter? The latter. Well, clearly, I never feel things are done. One of these stories I wrote, the last one I wrote years and years ago, and even now I'm making edits on it. Nothing ever feels done to me. I could continue working on it for so long and forever. Actually, Yeats did, he would publish his poems and then return to them years after the fact and still be editing them. And I'm sure if I opened up that book, which I won't do because that would torture me, I'd find so many things that I want to change, and so part of it is just when do I feel that I've exhausted the energy that went into it, and then I have to generate new energy, and that I think just by virtue of it being new has to go into another project. And that's usually my gauge. It's okay, it's imperfect, and I know that I'll feel this. I'll feel its imperfection, but for now, it's the best I can do, Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So as a musician, do you incorporate sort of your understanding of tempo in the way you're constructing sentences and paragraphs?
I want to say yes. I do really I think it's interesting to study music or concertos, symphonies, whatever it may be, to see when the greats know to speed up, when they drag out the tension, the tremolo of the instruments. And because I perform as a musician, I spend the majority of my time engaged in that work. And so I'm sure it all subconsciously does train my ear. I didn't study poetry really formally. And I was saying this to a friend of mine that I truly feel like a beginner when I sit down to write a poem. I don't really know what I'm doing ever. And she said to me, well, you've been studying music your whole life, so of course you've been studying poetry. And I kind of love that. And so I think there's something innate in our sense of rhythm that hopefully gets tuned and honed the more time we use that muscle.
Any other questions? All right, well, Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you all for coming.